Welcome to Horror in Detail. Are you ready to embark on a chilling journey into the realms of darkness? The mysterious and the bone-chilling world of horror stories. On this channel, we are dedicated to unraveling the most terrifying tales that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/Thessalonian. There are two kinds of witches. I've met two witches. Both were real in some sense of the word. But then again, it's hard to tell what to categorize real as. The sad truth is, there is a community of people who would find my second story really quite offensive, but I wish there was another way to put it. There are really two kinds of witches. There are witches, people who revere different types of medicine, people who light fires, sing songs, hang little things in their houses, read books, praise gods both real and gods made up by imaginative 17th century men with too much time. They collect herbs, crystals, and all that. Then there are witches who don't. I met one kind at a fair in a small purple hut. Velvets and feathers, plastic coins, and ethnically appropriated incense attained by one older lady who tried her very best to live in a pre-Christian Europe by botching together a mongrel set of ideas: Norse, Celt, flavorless Orient, Roma, and Faustian indulgence. The sort of person who took offense to the suggestion of the removal of a public statue of a goat-headed, pentagram-wielding, treated man with wings caressing the tops of children's heads. She even had a small one perched at her table. As I said, each one of these things perfectly reasonable on their own, but when brought together in the tent created a vague shroud of confrontational and alternative chaos. She was a perfectly nice witch too. Tried to sell me things, gems and whatnot. I used to find them fascinating, but I confess I was rather short with her, and I looked over her things with some degree of disdain. I looked at her small statuette of Baphomet and picked it up, threatening to smash it on the ground. She looked quite outraged, and quite rightly, appeared very confused as to why I had reacted in such a strange and violent way when I had seemed fascinated or entranced by her world. What would you do if I broke this? Don't do that. I'd demand that you pay for it, and if you didn't, I'd call the police. Are you a witch or not? Curse me. Curse me now. She frowned. You people are all the same. You're infringing my religious rights. How dare you mock me? Now I was getting angry. I just asked you to curse me. If that's mockery, then what the hell are you? Pathetic. I put the statuette down. Poor little Baphomet didn't so much as wink his goat eye. She looked about ready to throw some exotic spices in my face. I could tell she wished she believed in curses, so she could throw one at me. But as a witch, of course, she was utterly powerless. Ishtar wasn't going to help her, nor would any long-dead but observably femininity-empowering goddess. I think the message she received was that I was a religious fundamentalist. This was not my intention. I very nearly had to resist the urge to dismantle the whole tent. I realized how that would look, especially in an environment such as the fair. Perhaps I would be accused by the mob. Quite ironic, really. Of course I regretted it when I was driving away. The truth is, I looked over her things with disdain, because I had already met another witch. The other kind. I had been younger, around 7 at the time. A good age, I guess. I was waiting outside my school to be picked up. I remember exactly what had happened that day. Exactly. One of my friends, Dan, had scared me while I was in the toilet. The water fountain in the front wasn't cold enough, so I went to the back one. We had to write recounts of what we had done on Saturday, and I pondered making up a funny story about the dog, but then decided not to, because I felt bad about lying on the paper. I was waiting outside for my older brother to come and walk me home, and then a woman came up and spoke to me. She was really terrifically normal looking. Not pretty, not ugly, not old, not wearing any kind of hat. "Hello," she said. She didn't smile. Her voice was funny. Normal, but just a little bit strange. She reminded me of when a parrot said hello. It caught you off guard with how lifelike it sounds, but still not near enough to fool you into thinking it was a person. But nevertheless, if you heard that hello in an empty house, I couldn't move. I wasn't scared, but I couldn't move and didn't know why. Then she stood up and walked away, and my body got up and followed her. I was really only worried because my brother would wonder where I was. She walked ahead, and I walked behind, my head down, and started to cry. She didn't care. She kept walking and turned around and smiled at me then. I couldn't believe it. I had never seen an adult behave that way. I had seen my mom and dad get worried when I was sad, or seen them laugh because I was crying for a funny reason. I had seen my brother get annoyed. I had seen other parents feel sorry, or seen them get annoyed. I had seen teachers get worried that I'd have to go home. But I had never seen a look in anyone's eyes quite like hers. I hope I never see it again. It was only for a split second, as her face passed under the shadow of a tree, and I felt like I had seen something I very much was not supposed to. It was like her eyes were a little tiny bit too wide, and a little tiny bit too red and veiny, and her pupils were a little tiny bit too small. Her mouth was stretched a bit too upwards and not enough sideways, and her teeth were a bit too straight. I could see her tongue pressing hard behind those straight teeth. I cried, my head down, and she smiled at me that way, and I stopped. I just felt like I needed to. I don't know how long we were walking for, but day eventually turned to night, and we were still going, off the road and into the trees. But something was odd about them too. I could hear no birds or crickets, just the wind and our footsteps. But hers were quieter. In the distance, there was a bonfire, I think. When we were 100 meters away from it, she tore her clothes off and kept walking. I had never seen a naked woman before, so I couldn't be sure if she looked normal or not. I can't remember. But as she walked, her feet bled. I could see the bonfire now, closer, and what I saw was enough to break me out of the hold she had. Dark shapes, dancing and leaping around the fire, twisting all wrong. Then they turned into people, then back into things. Twisted lolling tongues, pale faces in the flames. Things dancing. She turned around and went to grab my hand. I pulled away. She went to grab it again. When she did, I ran. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I had never truly understood what that meant until right now. My feet scraped on the leaves, my arms jolted, my legs burned, my chest hurt, my lungs gasped. I could not hear behind me for certain. My feet fell loudly on the ground, and my blood rushed in my ears. But I could feel her fingers brushing on my shoulders, touching the back of my head, pulling my hair. Sometimes I felt them at my back, just missing my legs. I would go for minutes feeling nothing, and just as I felt too tired to go on, there her fingers would be, there her breath on the back of my little neck, my hairs raising. And then I heard her screaming. The sound was coming from far above and behind me. The sound was not a woman screaming. Whether she had grown to be horribly tall, or if she was flying through the woods after me, I don't want to know. I didn't want to know. I just ran and burned, her fingers brushing by arms, by legs, my back, by head, clawing, my cheeks, my lips, my eyes, my armpits, my waist, my groin, the backs of my knees, my ankles. I ran until I was out of the dark, quiet woods and back into the daylight. Suddenly I felt nothing touching me anymore. But I kept running still, and the fact that it had stopped only made it feel worse. If she had stopped, she was trying to hide. If she was trying to hide, it wasn't some invisible force, it was real. And if what I had felt had been real, and she had hid it from the daylight, then what in God's name had she looked like? I ran until everything on me was so painful I no longer cared. I didn't want to look behind, because I remembered this thing my mom always used to say to scare me, and I knew that if I looked around now, I would always remember the two things together. It was one of those times when a phrase repeats and repeats in your head, and you don't know why. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and, having once turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. I turned around the street corner. Only then did I look behind. I looked forward, then behind, then forward, then behind, watching the corner, always waiting, always expecting to see something. Eventually I did. A cat walked around the corner and stopped, staring at me. I didn't freeze this time. I kept walking, kept staring. The cat didn't move, and then it started walking towards me like a normal cat. And for a moment I thought that was all it was. An ordinary cat. It lifted its paw and started licking it innocently enough. But I ran anyway. I ran until the cat was out of sight. Because just for the tiniest moment, the cat had human hands, with long spindly fingers spidering on the bricks of the pavement. Second story. This story was shared by u/veteran64. Strange creature spotted and pursued during a bonfire. Background: last week at my friend's farm, northern Illinois. It's a large plot with a forest to the north. Our bonfire was near his barn, about 100 feet from the woods, with crops to the west and south. 12 of us at the bonfire. We're all around 15 years old, and 5 of us, myself included, on a FOID card, required to posse or purchase firearms. Story: the bonfire is going as planned, and at around 10 p.m. we light it up. All of us are chatting and having fun when one of my friends stops everyone. That friend was sitting near the crops. Listen. Everyone shuts up, and we hear a really strange noise coming from the field. It's nearly impossible to describe perfectly, but it was a really deep hissing noise. Like if a large dog could hiss, it'd sound like that creature. My friend, who we'll call T, shines a flashlight toward there. From that distance, the light was hazy, but we saw a figure about 30 feet away from the fire. It was on all fours, about 5 feet long. It had large, powerful-looking hind legs coupled with feet that had claws, small but they looked lethal. But its front legs were long and stringy, with much more menacing claws. It was covered with fur, and its head was dog-like with large canines visible. The creature's eyes were deep blue and reflected the light. The party right now is struggling to comprehend what's happening. Most of us are just staring at the creature, which in turn is staring back at us. This continued for at least a minute until T comes to his senses. I'm gonna sneak back to the house and grab my guns, yell if that thing does anything weird. T leaves and the creature watches, its eyes following T as he enters the house. At this point we have 3 flashlights on it, and it's perfectly visible to us. 2 minutes later the door opens and T comes out with 2.22s and a 9mm. The creature sees T and gets on its hind legs. I'm assuming it's a biped that was sitting down at the field, running toward the woods with a huge gait. Now the thing looks at least 6 foot tall. T hands me the 9mm and hands my other friend, the second .22. The creature's 20 feet out from the forest, and T shoots at it, missing. R stays at the fire while me and T go after it. Only now I realize how stupid we are. The thing's at the foot of the forest, and it climbs up a tree. We both stop and fire a few more shots into the trees. We walk back, and everyone decided to call their parents and finish it up early. Our excuse was a small downpour had started, and we had to finish early. No one's talking about it, and we're not planning on telling our parents. T's parents led 2 more hunting trips with bows and arrows due to the strict gun laws, but we didn't find anything. The tracks it left were washed away during a harsh storm. So 2 questions. What the hell did we see, and has anyone else seen it? Also, I typed this on a phone, so excuse some grammar issues that may arise. I'll edit it when I get access to a computer. Third story. This story was shared by u/sleepingguy5. Stay out of the Ozarks. I've been a biologist ever since I was 22 years old. I grew up on a farm in rural Illinois, so nature has never been a stranger to me. Playing in the woods was how I entertained myself growing up. Spending all my time in a forest as a child, people expect me to have stories about Bigfoot or strange noises or finding some weird shrine out in the middle of the woods. But no, the weirdest thing I ever encountered was a bobcat screeching. It sounds just like a woman's dying scream. And yes, to everyone who's ever claimed to hear a skinwalker or go man screeching in the woods at night, I promise you, it was just a bobcat. The truth is often mundane and disappointing. You'd think this would mean I'd have gotten bored of the woods, but I never really lost my love for them. Nature is boring. That's why I like it. You know what to expect. That's why, after college, I decided to make studying nature my full-time career. I'm a biologist for the Sierra Club, specialized in the ecosystems of Midwestern America: fish, birds, deer, elk, bear, wolves, the like. I've spent weeks in fire towers, cabins, campsites, always miles away from civilization. I'm usually gathering data on local wildlife, measuring for pollutants, determining whether the ecosystem is stable or if anything threatens it. The work is not glamorous, but I enjoy it. And nature had still never surprised me. Until my last assignment. I was designated to be stationed, alone, in a cabin in the Ozarks. The assignment was supposed to last 3 weeks in May. The Sierra Club was alerted to a steady decline in the local elk population over the last decade. Nothing drastic, but enough to raise concern. My job was to take census of the wildlife, measure for pollutants, the usual. These are my diary entries for my assignment, starting with my first night. I arrived in the evening in early May. Nothing was amiss the first 2 nights. It seemed an assignment like any other. The sounds of the forest were exactly what you'd expect: crickets, an owl's hoot, and the occasional elk call. I was sent here in May because that's their mating season. The elk are out and about looking for dates, and that makes them easy to count. Elk mating is pretty straightforward. The female lets out a call and waits for a male to find her. Usually it's first come, first served, if you catch my drift. If only, right? It was clear that love was in the air, and for all the calling, you'd think I would start seeing elk. But by the second day, I still hadn't spotted a single one. The third night, I was lying awake in bed, uneasy. Something wasn't sitting right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I was about to nod off when a female call cut through the night. I sighed. That was the second time that night I'd heard her. What? Are the fellas having a guys' night in or something? And that's when it finally hit me. I shot bolt upright in bed. For the last 3 nights, I had heard nothing but female mating calls. That should have drawn every male within half a mile. Now elk are not discreet, and they don't beat around the bush. When that male gets to the female, well, let's just let the whole forest will know about it. I sat in bed, staring out into the night, pondering. There have to be males close enough to hear this female. So after 3 nights of her calls, why haven't I heard the main event? The third day, I went out onto the trails, once again looking for some sign of elk in the forest. What I found was not encouraging. About a quarter mile from my cabin, I was trekking down the trail when I noticed something 30 feet into the woods. A large, brown, fuzzy mass lying in the brush. I smiled. An elk taking a midday nap? I took out my binoculars to get a closer look. It was an elk all right. But my smile dropped when I realized that the brown, fuzzy mass was completely still. I carry a hunting rifle with me for safety. I readied it and approached the elk carefully. It looked fine from where I was standing, but I nearly dropped my rifle when I rounded to the animal's front. It was carnage. The poor creature had been completely gutted. What little remained of its entrails hung loosely out of its chest cavity. The ribs had been pulled apart, and huge claw marks scarred its flank. Its head was barely connected to its body by a few weak strands of flesh. I heaved and almost lost what little breakfast I'd had. It was horrifying. I had to take a few moments to collect myself. This was the first time that nature had surprised me. What could have possibly done this? I've studied wildlife for years. This was a bull elk in its prime. It would have stood 9 feet tall alive, a king of the forest. There is no predator on this continent that could have taken down a full-grown bull, pack or no pack. Even a grizzly wouldn't mess with something this big. And bears are mostly scavengers anyway. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to think of an explanation. Maybe it had been sick? Maybe a predator came upon it in its sleep, took it by surprise? Yes, that must be it. It couldn't have fought back. But this savagery, those claw marks were bigger than even a grizzly's. And its ribs, no quadruped could have exerted leverage on the ribs to split them like that. You would need arms. A chilling thought occurred. A human? Could humans have done this? But why? Hunters would skin it, or take the head at least, to mount on their wall. Is some psychopath out here dismembering wildlife for fun? And that still wouldn't explain those gruesome claws. Whatever this was, it needed to be reported. I was sent here to investigate the elk population declining, and this had to be related. I fished out my camera to take photos. Having to document the horror from every angle was heart-wrenching. The look in its eyes. This elk had been terrified when it died. I want to take one last shot. Just as the shutter clicked, my ears registered something. A sound from behind me that my camera had nearly drowned out. I whipped around. I had barely heard it, but it was there. A twig snapping. My camera hung from my neck, and my rifle from my shoulder. I dropped the one to snatch up the other. Idiot, I thought to myself as I pointed the rifle towards the sound. I had been so shaken by the sight of the body, I had completely overlooked one important fact. The kill was fresh. This corpse hadn't even begun to decay. This elk had been dead no more than half a day. And that means whatever killed it may still be nearby. With my rifle still trained on the spot, I backed away towards the trail. My hike back to the cabin was the only time in my life I felt scared of the forest. Trees surrounding me on all sides, no visibility. I jumped at the slightest sounds, never lowering my rifle, never going more than 5 seconds without looking behind me. I felt like prey, never knowing where the danger would come from or when. I didn't relax until my cabin door was closed and locked behind me. I spent the rest of my day inside the cabin, shaken. I readied the photos and sent them to my supervisors. They would take a day or two to respond. Until then, my plan was to investigate. During the day, and with my rifle ready. That night was my last night at the cabin. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a female elk call again. The first one that I'd heard that day. And close. Very close. Wildlife don't like buildings. They smell of fire and metal and gasoline, all unnatural to them. They steer clear. What was this elk doing so close to my cabin? I peered out my window into the dark of the forest. No sign of her. She must have been beyond the tree line. I grabbed my rifle. Of course, I wasn't going to shoot the elk, but I might send a few shots into the air to scare her off. It would be nice to know the elk are breeding normally, but I could do without front row seats. I unlocked my cabin and took a step out onto my porch, rifle still in hand. My eyes scanned the tree line, looking for the female. That's when a pair of antlers struck out from behind a tree. An elk's had followed them and turned peer right out at me. But this was a buck, probably attracted by the female's calls. This was promising, but all the more reason to scare them away. I raised my rifle to the sky and prepared to fire. That was when the elk flew into the air. Or its head did. The buck's had sailed in an arc towards me and landed just feet away from my door. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Something or someone had been holding the head, and had just thrown it. I nearly pissed myself in fear. I pointed my rifle at the tree where the buck's head had appeared. The light from my cabin barely reached. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Had I just seen claws retreat around the trunk? I was frozen. I needed to reach behind me to open my door and get back inside. But I was too scared to turn my back on the forest or even take a hand off of my rifle. After a few seconds, I finally gathered up the nerve to brace the rifle against my shoulder, my fingers still on the trigger. I groped behind me until my left hand found the doorknob, never taking my eyes off the tree. Thank God the door had not locked behind me. With my left hand, I turned the knob and pushed open the door, then drew it back to my rifle. I backed away quickly into the cabin, slamming the door and locking it. I hurried to the windows, drawing all my blinds and making sure each was locked, never letting my rifle out of arm's reach. The terror I felt as I approached each window, never knowing if there would be someone or something on the other side of the glass staring back at me. There hadn't been, which was almost as unnerving. I rushed to the satellite phone to call the sheriff's office at the base of the mountain. The relief I felt when they picked up. "You need to get up here," I pleaded. "Who is this?" It was the sheriff's deputy on the other end. I'd met him and the sheriff before beginning my stay at the cabin. "It's me. I'm the guy stationed up at the cabin on the mountain." "Oh, sorry about that. What's the problem?" "There's someone up here fucking with me." "Get up here now." Whoa, slow down. You mean like kids or something?" "No, it is not fucking kids. Someone up here just threw a decapitated elk head at my cabin." In my panic, I'd somehow kept the awareness to use the phrase someone instead of something. I didn't want this guy to think I was drunk or crazy. I just needed him to get up here. "Well, what did they look like? How many were there? Did they have guns?" "I have no fucking idea, man. They killed a goddamn elk, cut the head off, and threw it at my cabin. Just get the hell up here." "Oh shit. Okay. Lock yourself in there. We're on our way." "Man, please stay on the line. I'm scared here." I really was terrified. I wanted someone to stay on the phone with me, even if it couldn't help me. The man replied, "I can't get to you and stay on the line at the same time. I'm calling the sheriff now. We're on our way. Just lock yourself in and stay there." The man hung up. I swore. I was alone again. A female elk call rang out again. This time it was even closer. It sounded like it was right outside now. I took up my rifle again. That's when the tapping started. While I was talking to the deputy, I hadn't been watching the windows. The sound was coming from the window to the right of my front door. My eyes widened in horror. A single gray claw was tapping on the right edge of the window. Just one claw. Whatever it was attached to wanted to stay out of sight. The claw stopped tapping. Instead, it drew itself along the window and out of my sight, leaving a long, ugly scratch. The sound was horrible, but it didn't stop when it left the window. I could still hear it dragging along the wooden walls of my cabin. The creature was scratching through solid wood. Could it break through my windows? Why didn't it? My knees shook. I tracked the sound of the scratching with my rifle. My mind raced. Could this thing get in? How long until the sheriff showed up? I was high up on the mountain. The drive up here took 45 minutes. Even if they hurried, it might be a half hour. Even if they did get here, could they stop this thing? Should I make a run for my truck? No. Whatever that thing was, it could get to me before I got the truck up and running. Something nagged at the back of my head, but I could barely think. The scratching was louder and louder. Whatever this thing was, it had torn a bull elk to shreds. How could I stop it? The bull, that's when I realized it. The head. It was the same head as the bull I'd seen earlier. It had the same scar down its right cheek. This thing was taunting me. It must have been there when I found the dead elk. It had been watching me, and now it had thrown the head at me. Was it telling me to go away? To get out of its territory? I gasped. With my mind racing, I hadn't noticed that the scratching had stopped. Where was that thing? My eyes darted from window to window. No sign of it. Until the loud thud right above me. It's on the goddamn roof, I thought. Its footsteps echoed through my cabin. Between each step came rhythmic taps, no doubt from its claws. Was it testing for weaknesses? Was it merely toying with me? It had only been a few minutes since I called the sheriff's office. I was still far from safety. I hadn't moved since the call. The thing on my roof thudded from spot to spot. The shock was starting to wear off. Focus. Think. I told myself. The thing had probably seen me through my window. It was right above me. The bathroom. The bathroom was the safest spot. There were no windows. If it does break in, it will have to look for me, then break through the bathroom door. That might buy me an extra minute, and it might save my life. The creature knew where I was. I had to try to change that. I slowly slipped off my shoes. Keeping my rifle trained on the roof, I kicked a shoe towards my bed. Sure enough, the thuds on my roof followed, stopping right above the spot where my shoe had landed. It's tracking me. I slowly shuffled to the bathroom, not raising my feet, afraid to make a sound. Praying that the door would not creak, I opened the bathroom, preparing to lock myself inside. I was shutting myself in, hoping that I wouldn't die in this bathroom, when I heard a loud scratch, followed by a dull thud. It had jumped off the roof. It was on the ground again, outside the cabin. Why? Was it going away? I was afraid to hope that maybe it had gotten bored. Maybe it had found some other prey. That was when I heard the woman scream. I gasped and covered my mouth. How was that possible? No one else is up here. A hiker. A camper maybe? The scream came again. "Help!" she cried out. I gripped my rifle, crying now. I was frozen in fear. That thing was out there, chasing some poor woman, and I was too cowardly to help her. I just wanted to stay in that bathroom, hiding, hoping that every second the thing spent chasing that woman was another second closer to the sheriff getting here. I don't know how long I sat there, cowering. Another, more desperate scream. "Help me!" There was something in her terror. She was more scared than I was. And there I sat, letting her die. My shame overcame my fear. I gripped my rifle tighter and left the bathroom. I marched to the door, ready to face whatever this creature was. Maybe I could distract it, buy time for her to get away. Maybe the sheriff would find her, even if the thing got me first. Just as I was reaching for the doorknob, she cried out again. A pained, dying scream. I was too late. That thing had gotten to her. I was a coward, and because of that, she was dead. The woman moaned in pain, this time just a few meters away from my door. This must be her final moments. And I listened, safe in my cabin. She groaned once more, but this sounded different somehow, it was. My eyes widened in shock and realization. I drew my hand from the doorknob, as if it had burned me. I had never unlocked it. Thank God. The moan came again. This time, unmistakable. That was not a moan of pain or terror. It was an entirely different kind of moaning. I backed away from the door. "You motherfucker," I muttered. "You almost got me." It all made sense now. There never was any female elk. Mimicry is a common adaptation in all ecosystems, both for prey and for predators. This thing, it let out female elk cries to draw in males. And then, well, I had already seen the result in the forest. That's why I never heard the elk mating. There was no female waiting for them, only this monster. And now it was trying the same tactic on me. I nearly sobbed in terror. It had tried to lure me with the sound of a woman in distress. It thought that might draw me out. When that didn't work, it switched to its tried and true method, a mating call. I aimed my rifle at the door. The moans continued, louder and more intense, building into a climax. I was nauseous at the thought of whatever it was out there, squatting in the dark, mouth agape, emitting this perversion of a woman's voice, trying to draw me out into the dark and rip me apart just like that elk. I stood with my rifle trained at the door, not moving. I had resolved that I was going to stand there until the sun rose or until the sheriff came. And the moment I saw this thing, I was going to shoot it. I don't know how long I stood there among the echoes of that sick creature. Eventually, the moans puttered out, and I was left in silence. Until the tapping began again, in the same spot as before. There it was, that single gray claw, tapping on that same spot where it had scratched the glass. But then a second claw joined it. Then a third. It drummed them along the glass. Slowly, ever so slowly, a patch of gray fur poked out from the edge of the window. Time stopped. and the creature brought its face into full view. It was terrible, like a sloth, but its mouth and nose were caked in blood. It had tiny, beady eyes, front-facing, a predator's eyes, large, pointed ears, almost like a bat, thin, cracked lips. The monster looked right into my eyes. It cocked its head, and then it pulled those terrible, bloody lips back into a smile. Its razor-sharp teeth, still stained with blood and flesh, I'll never forget them. It pointed that hideous grin at me as it drummed those claws on my window. Shoot, 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 I told myself, but I was frozen. This thing was going to kill me. Light poured through the front window. The monster disappeared out of sight. The sheriff and deputy had arrived in their truck. The two of them sauntered up to my porch and knocked. I had to shake myself out of my stupor and open the door. Both of them backed off and drew their weapons at me, screaming at me to put the gun down. I was still in shock. I think the only thing that kept them from shooting me was the terrified look in my eyes. They asked me what the hell was going on. I could barely speak. I just kept frantically repeating that they needed to get inside, that it was still out there. They eventually told me to come with them down to the sheriff's station. At first, I refused to leave the cabin. They sort of half-dragged, half-walked me to the truck. They said I was like an owl the whole ride down, my head on a swivel, always scanning the tree line for it. I must have fallen asleep after I got to the station. I woke up the next morning in a cell. I was confused and disoriented. I nearly wept from fear when I finally remembered everything I had been through the night before. The sheriff and deputy sat me down in a room and asked me what the hell happened that night. I was silent at first. I didn't know what to tell them. If I told the truth, they'd think I was crazy. They asked me about the elk's head that I'd told them about during the call. It was gone when they got there. Just a bloody stain on the ground where it had been lying. I made up a story. Said that some kids were prowling around my cabin, making noises, trying to scare me. I called the sheriff's office because I thought I saw one of them with a gun. The sheriff only made me go over the story once. He seemed satisfied. He took me back up there the next day to collect my stuff. In broad daylight, of course. Sure enough, there were deep scratch marks along the side of the cabin. The sheriff didn't look at me. Kids, he said. We collected my things quickly and hurried back down the mountain. I reported to my supervisors that it was probably overhunting causing the population decline. They would never believe the truth. The sheriff saw me off while I was waiting for the bus to take me back home. He shook my hand and drew me in for one of the manly half-hugs. He gripped my shoulder. "Don't come back," he whispered. I gave him a confused look. He stared me right in the eyes. "It knows you now, has your scent, seen your face, heard your voice. You got away once. It won't happen again. So don't ever come back." That was years ago. I burned the clothes that I had worn that trip, so there's no way they'd end up near the Ozarks again. Never been back anywhere near the Ozarks. And anyone who's ever asked me, I always tell them to steer clear. I've spent so much time trying to forget what I saw that night. But that face, I remember every detail. It's kept me up so many nights with so many questions. What the hell was it? Some freak of nature? A mutant that somehow survived past infancy? Something supernatural? An alien? Those ears, perfectly crafted to detect minute sounds, just like a bat. That explains its mimicry. It grew up in that forest, hearing the elk calls. After a while, it learned to copy them. I've spent so many nights asking myself, how did it know a woman's voice? I dread to ponder the answer. When sleep finally comes, I have nightmares. Nightmares about campers sitting around their fire, when all of a sudden they hear a voice calling out to them from the woods, crying for help. The voice in my nightmares, calling them into the darkness of the trees, away from the safety of their fire. The voice, my voice. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Rogue Hero. I'll never walk Sutton Wilderness in the dark again. The sun wouldn't rise for another hour when I leashed up my dog for our walk. You see, my wife and I started going to the gym on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Last week, our trainer wanted us to add cardio to our routine, so Tuesdays and Thursdays became our cardio days. Our gym was small, and with only one treadmill working at the moment, I opted to get my exercise later in the day via a hike through the nearby urban wilderness. I figured this would also be an excellent opportunity to walk our dog, Penny. Fall showed no signs of coming early to Oklahoma as we stepped outside to the 75-degree heat. With all of the lakes in the Gulf Stream, Oklahoma can get unbearably humid. On Tuesday, when I did the walk at 10 a.m., I felt sweaty enough to want to take a second shower from a 40-minute hike. Today, I opted to start at 6 a.m. before I'd shower and match my wife's time at the gym. Despite the dark, there were several cars parked in the lot for Sutton Wilderness. Goes to show that the Sutton Go-Man isn't real, I joked. I had heard of the urban legend about a go-man stalking the woods at night, but that was the extent of my knowledge until I listened to a local podcast that went more in depth. The host described the story as one that echoed other go-man stories across the nation. His research compared the sightings of woodland monsters, like Bigfoot, through a cultural lens, with people from British backgrounds familiar with ape men, werewolves from Germanic history, and the go-men from the Dutch. Similar to other go-man stories, this creature existed near a hospital, or in the case of Sutton Wilderness, a psychiatric ward. The urban wilderness was once grounds for the Griffin Memorial Hospital, an old Central State mental hospital. As the hospital shrunk, the state turned the landscape into the park people enjoy today. According to urban legends, the hospital found a baby deformed with horns to the point they thought the child was a goat at first. The hospital cared for the baby, and as the child grew up and the landscape changed, the child decided to stay here. The podcast host noted that this would put the Goatman well over 70 years old and said that some people believe the spirit of the Goatman is what haunts the woods. Regardless of the form, the legend warns that people will hear footsteps made by hosts coming from behind them. If a person walked faster or slower, the steps would match their pace until one would feel hot breath on their neck, by which time you were too late. If you turned around, the go-man would grab you and drag you deep into the woods, never to be seen again. The main trail for the park was about 1.5 miles long, with the two main entrances looping back at a wooden pavilion. We took the path to our right. Although it was dark, and I could barely see with all of the tree coverage, I was more concerned about my dog eating something she shouldn't than anything else. The city had widened the trails a couple of years ago to give people more space when crossing each other and reduce the tick population. My dog stopped. Her ears perked up and turned to the south toward the rhythmic beat of drums off in the distance. I tugged on her leash and assured her, "It's just the high school band practicing, Penny." I was over a third of the way on the trail before I encountered my first person. They appeared to be an older gentleman, hard to say with the blue disposable face mask, long-sleeve shirt, pants, and fisher hat they wore. I nodded my head hello, and they walked past without saying a word. When we got to the long straight path near the pond, something behind us caught my dog's attention. I turned around, and there was a white light floating through the bushes, moving fast along the trail and getting closer. I'm ashamed to admit that my brain took a long moment before realizing this was a headlight from a bike. In my defense, bicycles were not allowed on the trails. I pulled Penny closer to me as we moved to the side and let them pass. Penny and I came to the final stretch of the woods, which had the thickest tree coverage. Penny's tail curled inward as she got closer to my side. An educational sign about life in the woods highlighted the various animals one could find, such as bark beetles, ornate box turtles, cedar waxwings, bobcats, easternwood rats, and downy woodpeckers. Back away from the sign was a hut made out of fallen tree branches. I always viewed this fairy house as something fun for kids to explore, but not today. There were pieces of the bike I saw earlier scattered on the ground. The bike looked like it had been mangled by some machine, as no person or creature could do that kind of damage. I turned on my phone's flashlight. While I stayed put on the paved trail, I used the light to follow the bike pieces to the hut. Something moved inside. I cut away the shadows with my light and revealed a pair of green eyes reflecting at me. I ran, and so did Penny. I was struggling to keep up with her, but I had her on the leash still. Behind us, I heard what sounded like hooves matching my pace on the paved trail. I dared not to look back. The sun was rising as we made our escape out of the woods and back to the gazebo. With the sound of hooves gone and no warm breath on my neck, I stopped to catch my breath. Staying behind in the trees was someone about my height. I thought I saw horns like a goat, but as I tried to get a good look at them, they faded into the shadows. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Xenocide. There's a skinwalker lurking in the Jemez Mountains of New Mexico. I am a former resident of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I love it here. We have jaw-dropping sunsets along with our world-famous question, red or green? But there was one specific occurrence that makes me sick to my stomach that happened to have taken place only 2 hours from my humble city. It was early 2015. My father and my sister and I all decided to go camping in the Jemez Mountains one last time before school started. We own a camper, and we use it every time we go camping. So we hit the road in the early afternoon, and we arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. We have a great spot that is about a quarter mile off from the campgrounds. There's at least 1 or 2 people camping within a mile radius from our spot, so it's always nice and quiet. For some context, our spot is cornered by 2 semi-hills, and then there's a trail that leads to the main road. Father has told me that cattle and wildlife pass along that dinge trail at night, just another pro to camping in the Jemez. The sun started to set, so we made a campfire just behind the trail. After about 4 s'mores, me and my sister decide to hit the hay. My dad, being a firefighter, knows that you should never leave a campfire unattended, so he decides to stay out just a little bit longer before putting it out. It's around 9 p.m., and I'm falling asleep, until suddenly I heard my father scream from outside. I was then relieved when he chuckled and started to curse. He then came inside and told us what all the commotion was about. He said while he was watching the fire he felt breathing on his neck. He almost pissed himself, he said. He thought there was a bear behind him. He then slowly looked behind him only to see a moose. He cursed and laughed because a damn moose made him scream. We all started laughing and pushed the event aside. I woke up about an hour later to the bright glow of flames. Oh shit, Father didn't put out the fire, I thought to myself. I opened the blinds only to see 2 bright as hell eyes peering from the trail. They looked like a dog's eyes when you shine a flashlight on them, but only 10x brighter. I let out a curse and fell back to sleep. It was too late for that shit. I woke up the next day to the smell of bacon and eggs. I was still wondering about what my father said the night before. Something just seemed really off about it. Then I realized what was so off about what my father said. It hit me like a brick. I spoke with a stuttered dad. Moose don't live in New Mexico. He looked at me with a confused look, and then his face went stone cold. Tell your sister we're leaving in an hour. Pack all of your stuff up. We left about 45 minutes later. I knew my dad is a skeptic. He believes in the everything is connected kind of spirituality. Whenever we talk about ghosts or scary stories, he always says something along the lines of someone could have easily made that up. But the way he reacted to his realization of seeing a moose in New Mexico validated that he wasn't looking for a logical explanation. He wanted to get the hell out of there to protect us. I couldn't relate this experience to other scary stories until I heard of the so-called skinwalkers. I can confirm that what my dad saw that night was a skinwalker. It checked out in every category of what they look like and how they behave. The eyes of a skinwalker are brighter than LED lights. They can take the form of a coyote, deer, sheep, human, you name it. Now, of course, the logical explanation was that he saw an elk, not a moose. But when I pushed my dad to tell about what he saw, he swears to God that he saw a moose, because moose have elongated snouts that most elks lack. I needed to get this weight off of my chest, so if anybody can relate or develop a logical explanation for what me and my father saw, I am open to what you guys have to offer. And yes, we have gone back almost 7 times for the past 2 years, and we never saw it again. 6th story. Skinwalker took my cousin. When something like this happens, it happens out of absolutely nowhere with no warning. It's not some horror movie or story where you know something is about to happen. I'm going to describe what I felt and what I saw. I've been looking for somewhere to share this, and hopefully, someone can tell me what happened. I had never heard of Reddit or skinwalkers or anything before this happened. I wish I could say something cliche like I was on Skinwalker Ranch or my grandma is a Navajo or some shit like that, but I can't. I had never heard of the Navajo Indians or skinwalkers or anything, and I sure as hell didn't believe anything like that existed or even gave a fuck about it. I am 16 years old, and this happened this summer, June 9th, 2018. I grew up in the suburbs near Atlanta, so I had a completely normal life until this happened. I was off of school and my dad went up to Denver to visit my uncle and aunt and my cousin. I have no other cousins my age except for this one, so we were pretty close and kept in touch often. His name is Charlie, but we share the same last name cause his dad is my dad's brother, so I won't use our last name. Charlie was pretty big on mountain biking, so he wanted to take me to some mountain biking trails in Apex Park. The trails are not far away from civilization at all, and we weren't even going to spend the night there. We went down a few trails, everything was fine, and we passed some people, so we weren't alone. Absolutely nothing sketchy went down. It was hard to keep up with him, but he slowed down for me, and we had fun. It was around 6 p.m., and we were heading back to where we parked. Charlie was 18, so we drove ourselves. This is the part where everything goes to hell. We are riding back. Charlie is maybe 20 feet ahead of me. Then the smell hit me. God, the smell. It was disgusting. At first, I thought maybe we passed a dead animal or something. It was more metallic though, and it was very heavy in the air. Charlie stops but doesn't get off his bike. I slow down and stop next to him. He looks at me with a disgusted face. Do you smell that? What the fuck? The smell started to get stronger. It was so strong that I felt like gagging. Looking back, I wish that I had felt something watching us, or at least any indication that something was not right so that we could have left or found somebody. I guess Charlie had heard stories about these things cause I saw his face change from disgust to absolute fucking terror as the realization hit him. In less than 1 second from him saying that something went by so fast and tore him off that bike. I did not see it because I could barely process what the absolute fuck was going on. I was still on my bike staring at the place he just was. Chills flooded my body so fast that my vision went black even though my eyes were open. Then the adrenaline hit me. My brain pounding, but I had no thoughts. I didn't scream. Then I fucking looked up. It was right there. So fucking close to me. It looked down at me because it was huge, maybe a couple feet taller than me. I wish I could tell you I didn't get a good look, but it's always crystal clear in my memory. It was like a wolf, but standing upright like a person. Its fur was matted and greasy and fucking disgusting. But that wasn't what I was looking at. It had Charlie's face, smiling at me. The closest thing I can describe my reaction to is when the people in Bird Box see the monsters. God, I am crying writing this right now. The smile was pure evil but indescribable. Its mouth was way too big, and it was literally smiling from ear to ear. Then the eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They were pure black but not glossy. Like the black that absorbs 99% of light. At first, I couldn't even tell if he had eyes, but they were blacker than empty, if that makes sense. It is very hard to describe this. It wasn't breathing, just standing absolutely still. I could feel the strength radiating off of it, like a power not of this earth. There was no sign of Charlie anywhere. No screaming. Nothing. I knew I was next. I knew 100% I was going to die. My eyes flooded, but it wasn't like I was crying. The pure fear and chills just made my tear ducts run. Suddenly it dashed away, so quick I felt and heard the air rush around me. I felt someone grab my shoulder. "Kid, are you okay?" It was a fit guy in his mid-40s and his wife. I hadn't even heard them approach. Keep in mind that from Charlie saying, "Do you smell that?" to this guy grabbing me on the shoulder was about a 10-second span. All the things I just described were the emotions that were flooding me in that time, not actual thoughts. Then it hit me. I couldn't speak. I was gasping for air, my head pounding, vision blurry. "Are you okay, kid?" I just cried, and I was trembling so hard the guy thought I was having a seizure. I don't remember leaving the trail. I just remember getting to the exit, then getting to the hospital. Charlie is gone. After that, he went missing, but I know he is dead. They only found his bike completely destroyed. They sent a search party after him. No one believed me. They think he just got lost and or attacked by an animal. I went home. I have diagnosed PTSD now and nightmares almost every night. My life has been completely destroyed by this, and I know nothing will ever be the same. I couldn't leave my house for a long time. The days after that I spent researching what that thing was, and the closest thing I guess would be a skinwalker. It's nice to know I'm not the only one, and people on this site can actually believe each other. Everyone thinks I am crazy. 7th story. The day the Chupacabra was born. It is not common knowledge that the myth of the Chupacabra began in Puerto Rico and not Mexico, as the myth was popularized by the country of Central America. I never myself knew this until I searched online and found out the truth. Considering my grandparents lived during the time the first recorded incident happened, I decided to ask them if they recalled any news surrounding it at the time. My grandma unfortunately didn't live in Puerto Rico when it happened, and even if she did, she mostly forgets about a lot of things of her past. Don't worry, she has always been like that. My grandpa, on the other hand, looked at me with a serious face and then spaced out at another direction, like if he suddenly remembered something deep in his very old memories. He said, "Cojones, hace tiempo que no me acordaba," which meant it was a very long time since he recalled those memories, but he gladly accepted. This will be a rough translation of what he said. I remember it was in 1995. I didn't live in Canavanas, but an old long-gone friend of mine did. He was a farmer, like many of our parents before us. He always spent his days checking his livestock of fruits and attending his animals, like sheep and chickens. Like any farmer, he cared deeply about raising his animals with care, as in many times they served for putting food on the table, as were the customs. It was in the morning when, after getting dressed and walking out of his home, he saw that his animals were almost all dead except a chicken, who was hidden behind a pile of construction items inside his little shed. All of them had 2 holes on their necks and a large hole on their buttocks. It seemed like something had sucked the blood dry from the necks and then were carved from their backs in order to dry them even more. He wasn't the only one. Almost every animal in his little town had been killed just the same. It became such a spread concern that authorities were getting involved. The town folk were addressed and told that there is no danger, as in this could be just a wild animal. My friend thought they were all just a bunch of liars and decided that he would keep an eye out on any movement or sounds near his home. A couple of days passed, and a sound woke him up in the middle of the night. He knew that sound. It was the sound of a trap he had placed with pieces of raw, uncooked pig meat which was filled with blood. He quickly grabbed his machete and ran through the back door. He saw how a figure ran through the woods, away from my friend. He checked the trap, and it seemed that the animal was cut with a sharp part of the metal trap. My friend thought that if he was going to catch the animal, it would be now. He grabbed a lantern and went to look for the animal, following its trail of blood. As he walked through the woods and the grass with the trail of blood seemed more humid from rain, he tried to differentiate the sounds from coquis, crickets, and toads for any hint of the creature's presence. The more he walked, the more it seemed like it was a worthless effort and that maybe the creature was long gone. Then he heard an animal sound. It didn't sound like a threat, rather the sound an animal makes when it's startled or hurt. He ran towards it as fast as he could. Then he froze on his track at another sound, this time of a loud sound just in front of him. My friend put the lantern more in front of him and saw what would be known as the famous chupacabra. The thing had a dog on its mouth, chewing on its neck as it looked at my friend. He described it to me like an alien from movies. It had two black void long eyes which reflected the stars from it perfectly. Its skin was moist, and on its back it had small spikes that he compared to those of a puffer fish, only that they went on a straight line through its back. Its teeth said that they could be compared to nails of a chicken, but more elongated at many of them throughout its mouth. He gained his composure and tried to approach the creature, but it suddenly let go of the dog and hissed at my friend. He knew what was going on. It wasn't a threat sound. It was a warning to back off. He was foolish and always stubborn, always thinking he knew everything in life even before growing white hair. My friend shouted at the creature, and the creature was startled and took a few steps back, but then it stood slowly from his 4 legs to only being on 2. He noticed then that was bigger than him, as he was a short guy. The creature then gave a hellish screech sound and ran towards my friend, tackling him to the ground. He grabbed the creature's neck and tried to push it off. The creature was too strong, and with each passing second, its horrible teeth got closer and closer to his neck. He glanced at the machete he had dropped to his side and fought to get it. The creature then noticed that he was trying to do and bit his arm, sinking its teeth deep. My friend then took off his belt and stabbed the creature's eye with the small part that holds the belt tied around the waist. The creature let go as it tried to deal with the pain. My friend then used the machete and sliced on the creature's shoulder, spreading blood everywhere. My friend screamed louder and approached more and more the creature. It hunched itself and ran on the opposite direction from my friend into the deep woods. At this point, my friend heard the neighbors coming from behind him, as they had heard the fight between my friend and the creature. He said he had dealt with El Demonio de Mierda and needed to go to the hospital. When he got there, he was treated for his wound and pridefully explained that he had dealt with the farm animal killer. A day had passed, and while he was on bed, 3 men came to him. They were wearing black suits and looked to be gringos from United States. One of them talked Spanish surprisingly fluently and basically told my friend that he would have to shut up about everything and to not talk about his incident with the creature. They offered him a few $1,000s in cash, which he gladly accepted. After that, the mayor of the city reportedly searched for the creature everywhere with the local authorities, from rural parts where my friend lived to near urban sectors, but to no avail. My friend then used the money to get a better home to an urban neighborhood, and that was the end. I asked my grandfather he even believed his friend in the first place because it seemed like a wild story. He then told me that he was never convinced it was real and always thought that the scar on his arm was just that of the dog that he had found, not killed by the chupacabra, but rather his own machete. It made sense, but I would like to think how awesome it would have been to see a farmer wielding a machete face such a horrid mythical monster. I sure would pay to see such a spectacle. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.